Hello there and welcome once again to The Verdict. Mick Cornett with Meyers. We're here every week, meeting interesting people and dealing with topical issues. And today we got both. We got an interesting person and a topical issue.
Indeed. Cannabis makes the headlines almost every week or sometimes every day of the week. But that's what we're going to talk about today. And we've styled this show Cannabis Update. Try to get the situation changes in the cannabis industry quite often, and we want to see where we are. We have a real expert, an Oklahoma cannabis lawyer expert, Cambrie White, to join us today and talk about what's going on in the industry.
Yeah, I think everybody has questions, and today we'll get some answers. We'll be talking with Cambrie White today on The Verdict. We'll be right back.
Right now, 6 feet can feel like a long ways away. But from 6 feet, we can still smile at each other. From our doorways and our stairways, from opposite sides of the street and opposite sides of the country. Through fear and frustrations, we can remind each other that we are still here for each other. Because we can still smile at each other. And we're not going anywhere.
Military service ran in my blood, starting from my father, which joined the Navy. On the Chickasaw side, my uncle, which served in the United States Army. I'm Benjamin Espinosa, Chief Petty Officer, United States Navy, and I'm Chickasaw. I went to the Secretary of Defense's staff at the Pentagon in Washington, D.C., which ultimately led to becoming a combat support technician for Naval Special Warfare, specifically SEAL Team 10. I think to be proud and to love your tribe, to love being Chickasaw, you also have to love being American. You also have to love everything that America stands for. Equality, perseverance, professionalism, and power. I want my family to know that their father is a good person, but also feels that he has an obligation to the country and to love this nation. Anything worth having is worth dying for. The military and the country owes me nothing. I owe it everything.
See more stories about the Chickasaw people at profilesofanation.com.
Back to The Verdict. Mick Cornett with Kent Meyers. Kent's going to introduce today's guest.
Well, as we talked about in the open, our guest today is Cambrie White. She's an Oklahoma City attorney, has been practicing exclusively law in the cannabis area for about 5 years. She did her undergraduate work at the University of Texas in Austin. She did her law work at Oklahoma University Law School. Where, by the way, I should add that she distinguished herself academically. She has, as I say, been practicing cannabis law about 5 years. She is affiliated with the Oklahoma City law firm of Overman Legal Group, and also she's affiliated with Climb Collective. I'm sorry. Excuse me for messing that up. Climb Collective. A cannabis consulting agency here in Oklahoma City. She is vice president of the Oklahoma Cannabis Association, Industry Association. She, as an extern, worked, while in law school, worked for a good friend of ours, the Honorable Robert Bacharach, who is the United States Circuit Court judge in Denver. And she has published an article on tribal cannabis law in the American Indian Law Review, an article that's cited quite often by a lot of folks. Cambrie, sure nice to see you. Glad to have you.
Thank you guys so much for having me.
Yeah. Well, what brought you to Oklahoma originally?
So I'm from Texas, born and raised, but I specifically had a death in my family. My father passed away of cancer, so that piqued my interest at an early age in therapeutic benefits of medicinal cannabis. So I didn't exactly know what I wanted to do with my degree that I got from UT, which was in communications. So I was sort of looking at my options. Did I maybe want to go like the physician's assistant route? and, you know, sort of be on the front lines there, or also I took a, you know, pretty deep interest in the policy as well behind it. So then I decided to apply to, I actually think I applied to 27 different law schools, just trying to see, you know, what my options would be for the greatest chance to enter into a market where cannabis was going to play an important role. So I actually just got quite lucky that, you know, right around the time I published that article with Oklahoma City, or with University of Oklahoma Law, the state question 788 ended up legalizing medical marijuana just a couple months later. So timing was, you know, godlike almost. He had to be involved, I'm assuming. So that's what brought me here. And then just because of, you know, the area that I practice in, and also I just fell in love with the state of Oklahoma by moving here and coming to law school here. So
That vote you talk about was nearly 4 years ago now. So what do you think people don't understand about where it is now? What misconceptions are out there that we can clear up right here off the top of the show?
Yeah. So I think that, you know, the media likes to spin things as, you know, we're the Wild West of cannabis,
Yeah, I
right?
hear that term all the time.
Yeah, and I think it has somewhat of a negative connotation with it. You know, you hear a lot about there being too many dispensaries, you know, a dispensary on every corner of every street, and I prefer to look at it a little bit more in a positive light. We are one of the only, you know, setups in the country that actually allows mom and pop shops to be able to enter the market. You know, somewhere like Michigan, you have to have $200,000 just to even pay the application fee. So you know, there's a pro and a con, and I think the pros, at least for me, outweigh the benefit.
Yeah,
that
the barrier
you know,
to entry is almost,
right.
It's really small.
That's right, yeah. The barriers to entry here are very low. The application fee is quite low. And, you know, annually it's only $2,500 a year to renew. So, you know, it lets people get into the market and, you know, create a business for themselves, whereas, you know, in other states they wouldn't even have a chance. So,
Tell our viewers on a day-to-day basis what your practice is like. What do you actually do?
It varies every single day. So the one thing about cannabis law that I always joke around, the only thing that's consistent is that we're dynamic. Things change every single day. So I might get a call from a client asking, you know, can I come inspect their facility to determine whether or not it's up to code, walk through floor plans with architects to make sure that if they're processing and they're volatile, that it's C1D1 status and that it's going to be a safe facility to do those activities in. I also do a ton of licensing. So, you know, knowing the specifics of what it takes to qualify for licensing in the state. You know, OMA does a really great job on their website of having all of the forms and everything accessible.
Now, OMA, tell our viewers what that is an acronym for.
Sure. The Oklahoma Medical Marijuana Authority.
Thank you.
Yes. So that's our licensing authority here. It has been since 2018 when they opened the floodgates, so to speak. So I work really closely with Overman Legal on some other, you know, sort of novel issues about anything from, you know, if we change a law, for example, every legislative session they love to propose new proximity requirements. The proximity rule means that a dispensary can't be within 1,000 feet of a school. For some reason, every session they modify that just a little bit. And then there's been certain times where, you know, existing businesses are not grandfathered in. So then that creates issues where we have active businesses, they've been licensed and operating responsibly, and then they're now faced with needing to go the legal route and try and avoid litigation to maintain their open status. So I do pretty much everything in the
Are
cannabis
most
space.
doctors in the state open to their patients using marijuana for medicinal reasons?
So, I mean, so OMA posts a list of licensed physicians who are, you know, I guess in network that specifically will prescribe the patient license. One thing that's novel about our system is that there is no list of qualifying conditions. So if you look at somewhere like California, you know, they have, you know, scoliosis or cancer patients. You know, there's a very defined and limited list of what will qualify, at least on the medicinal side. And what State Question 788 did that was unlike anywhere ever before is that it gives the physicians actually the ability to say, as long as they can identify a reason for which they believe you would benefit from cannabis, they can prescribe it. So there's, you know, it's opened up the market here in a way that, you know, to put it in perspective, I think California, it took them 20 years to get 3% of their population enrolled. We had 3%, before even year 2.
Well, let me ask you to discuss the structure of the cannabis industry in Oklahoma, starting from the retail sale, and working backwards. The cannabis has got to come from somewhere. Is there any interim business between a grower and a retail dispensary?
Sure, yeah. There are so many other sort of side businesses that benefit from having medical cannabis be legal here. So, like I talked about earlier, I work with so many architects, engineers. Those businesses benefit a lot because, the more licensees that we have, the more work they have to do construction. And then also one thing that I think is sort of an interesting model that's arisen is transportation licensees. So they created a license last year where you could have a commercial transportation license, meaning that you could specifically go and pick up product from grows and then transport to dispensaries. And those commercial transporters can ensure basically that the transport is safe, because that's a huge concern is, if you're traveling across the state with marijuana, if you can actually have somebody who has like great business insurance to do that for you, and then also can make sure that their vehicle has certain protections that perhaps like my own personal vehicle wouldn't have. That's definitely one thing that's sort of arisen lately.
Any idea on how many people are actually employed through the industry, from the wholesale to the retail to the growers?
No, but so I'm a vice president of the Oklahoma Cannabis Industry Association, and one thing that I would love to see, and we talk about this sort of as a dream of ours one day, is an impact study. So similar to how they did the tribal impact study for tribal casinos and the gaming impact, and how many side businesses that ended up employing. I would love to see that in the cannabis space because, we have, I think, roughly around 12,000 business licensees currently. So, it would be insane, I think, to see the impact of, not only, the direct impact, but also, like I said, plumbers, electricians, people that are benefiting, landlords even, that are benefiting from leasing these spaces.
Cambrie White is an attorney in the cannabis industry here in the state of Oklahoma. We'll be right back with more.
OU Law has a history and heritage that are unparalleled. At the University of Oklahoma College of Law, we empower our students to pursue the career of their dreams. We have the highest U.S. News ranking ever achieved by an Oklahoma law school. We are the first law school in the country to launch a college-wide digital initiative. And this year, our competition teams rank number 2 in the nation. OU Law, generations of excellence, limitless possibilities.
We want to reach out to every veteran we can in Oklahoma. There's somewhere around 340,000 veterans here in Oklahoma. And half of those are still unaware of the benefits or don't know how to go about getting them.
We help guide the veterans through the VA system. It's a giant maze, and we kind of help guide them through that maze. So our job is to try to help the veterans get everything that they're legally entitled to. There's just a special place in my heart for our Vietnam veterans and our World War II veterans, as well as any veteran, and that's why I do the job.
Welcome back to the set of The Verdict. Mick, Cornett, and Kent Meyers, and our guest, Cambrie White. Kent, where do you want to go from here?
Well, cash.
Okay.
Let's spend some cash. I know that there was a lot written early on about banks not being willing to take deposits from dispensaries, selling a product and ending up with a lot of cash and no place to safely put it except under their mattress or something like that. Is that still the same, or has something happened in that regard?
Something amazing actually has happened in Oklahoma. So I personally have been working with Blake to develop some
Blake Johnson.
Yes, Blake Johnson at my office, to develop some standard operating procedures for banks that would like to implement cannabis programs. So, it does include a bit more oversight. They're going to ask for things like copies of all of your appropriate licensing, copies of all your reports to ensure that what you're depositing adds up to what you're claiming. So, it's not as blind as if you were to go in and, just open a regular personal banking account, but Oklahoma, by and large, has been that's one of the things I'm the most proud about, is that we have local banks here that actually will bank cannabis businesses and allow them to deposit their cash in safe and responsible ways.
Yeah, without naming any names, do we have banks that still won't do it?
Yes, absolutely. There are certain banks, specifically like national chains, won't bank you. Yeah, but there are some local banks that are amazing to work with. Oklahoma State Bank, Bank First. Those banks are.
Yeah, mention any that you want to mention.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Okay.
Cambrie, what is the state of Texas looking at going forward? Is there talk about their legislature or a statewide vote there?
Yeah, there's always talk. So last year, I believe they did end up expanding their list of qualifying conditions and also sort of bumped up the percentage amount of THC that the patients could be prescribed, but it's still very low. So the Farm Bill, the United States Farm Bill, so the federal law, is that anything with 0.3% dry weight THC or less is considered hemp. They consider that to be such a low level of THC that it's not considered a controlled substance or marijuana.
And hemp is legal to grow.
That's right, and hemp is legal to grow, that's right. So Texas, their medicinal rate is just barely above that. So, they still can't get the full benefits or the full power, but I don't know. I'm hearing some rumblings from legislators down there that they would love to beat Oklahoma before Oklahoma goes rec, if and when it goes rec.
If that happened, would
go rec. Tell our viewers what you meant by go rec.
Sure. So go recreational. So currently Oklahoma has a medical program only, meaning you have to get prescribed by a doctor in order to get the medicine. If and when we went rec, it would look something like. If you're 21 and older, you could go in, there would obviously be strings attached with that.
Excuse me, Mick. I
all right.
didn't mean to interrupt you.
If Texas legalized medicinal marijuana or any other kind, could Oklahoma-grown marijuana be transferred legally across state lines into Texas for that consumption?
Right. While that sounds like it makes sense to most of us, it is actually illegal. It, I believe, violates the Commerce Clause because you are crossing state lines. So at that point, federal law would be triggered, and federal law still dictates that cannabis is very much still illegal.
Is there any significant movement on that front to have federal government change its mind about that?
Sure. I would have loved to have saw that, obviously, with the Biden administration, but so far nothing. Just me hypothesizing, I feel like we would be more likely to see things like banking reform, security measures, things like that, sort of piecemeal versus just a nationwide decriminalization.
Anecdotally, it seemed like a year or two ago there were more retail stores in Oklahoma, and it seems now like I was going to use the term weeding them out, but that might have been a bad pun. But it seems like there's fewer. There's been some consolidation or some elimination maybe in the marketplace. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of what I currently do is a lot of M&A, so mergers and acquisitions. Some of our bigger fish clients are able to recognize, that certain businesses are not able to appropriately stock their inventory because it's hard to compete when we've got, 2,000 dispensary licensees. I think I read an article a couple years, or maybe 1 year back, that stated something like we have one dispensary for basically every 4 patients. At least within the city of Edmond, which you can see how that would create such a competitive market that, the smaller stores are not able to compete with the likes of stores that have 10 locations because they can take lower profit margins. So,
well, in the M&A area, the merger and acquisition area, is there any state regulation of mergers and acquisitions?
Currently, no.
Yeah.
Now, OMA does dictate that, if one store takes over operations of another, then we would have to update all of the licensing. The old owners would have to be removed from all of the OMA license, and then as well as the Bureau of Narcotics registration as well.
Is there any further local government authorities? In other words, can municipalities and counties enact laws that would affect the distribution or the growth?
Yes, absolutely. So counties specifically, and or cities, are in charge of issuing what's called a certificate of compliance. So that, I just call it a COC for short because I have to say it so many times in one day. COCs are issued by the local authority, and then they have to be part of your application to the state. So the state will not sign off until the local authorities sign off. And they have pretty wide latitude with what they can do there.
Okay.
Oklahoma is always the Wild West of something. Football, you name it. But why do people refer to Oklahoma as the Wild West of cannabis?
I think it's because, those low barriers to entry that we spoke about earlier, what that's resulted in is, a marketplace like perhaps the country might not, I don't think we've seen anything like this before. We have roughly, I think, 12,000 business licensees in the state. And I think what that's leading to is, there's too much marijuana perhaps being grown in the state to supply our limited, medical patient count. So I think because there, are such lax requirements currently on licensing, I particularly have taken an interest in the legislative session this year, and so I think there's 81 bills right now up that specifically mention cannabis, and I've done some digging, and it looks like, from all accounts, that they are going to be tightening, or at least attempting to tighten, some of the diligence requirements from OMA and OBN to make sure that, when we are licensing people, we're licensing the correct good actors and trying to cut down on, some of the negative publicity perhaps that's leading to the nickname the Wild West.
Mm-hmm. If a person today sees this show and they're feel like they're a little entrepreneurial, where are the business opportunities? When people come to your office and say they want to get in the industry, do you direct them toward the retail side or the wholesale side or the transportation side, or is there an area of that metric that seems more inviting right now, or a hole in the marketplace?
Yeah, I think that the transportation side, they have the least licensees other than the waste licensees, which were previously capped at 10. There's no cap on transportation licensees. Another interesting meeting I took recently was security. So, I'm still sort of working with the Bureau of Narcotics right now to determine whether or not people can be armed when, they're doing transports, because we've seen an uptick in crime because, cannabis, people walking around with a bunch of cash and or valuable cannabis are easy targets right now. So, I think currently I would probably steer you away from maybe the retail front, because we've already seen a little bit of a decline there. But, these sort of secondary services and or just sort of filling the gap with transportation licensees is where I'd push people.
We don't have but about a minute left, but can you briefly tell us, are you aware of how the prices, we'll say, for cannabis generally in Oklahoma compare to the prices in Texas?
So in Texas, they just don't have the same market that we have.
Right.
Specifically, their THC count is so much lower. I'm not certain what their prices look like from the patient standpoint. I believe they only have a couple of operators, so I would assume our prices are much lower.
Yeah.
We're almost out of time. I want to ask you about rural land values. There's this impression that the price of land is going up, and it's because so many people are wanting to grow cannabis. Am I on the right track there? Is that really happening?
Yes. We get a lot of calls, and I know I've spoken with legislators about, constituents being upset that, because there are so many people migrating to Oklahoma right now to start cannabis businesses, the price of, just property in general, not even with houses on it, just rural property has increased.
Cambrie White, thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, thank you so much.
All right, thank you guys.
All right. Kit and I'll have a final word after this.
It used to be okay in hospitals. It used to be okay in movie theaters. It was okay in classrooms, restaurants, and airplanes. But thanks to a greater understanding of the dangers, that's not okay anymore. So now that we know secondhand smoke causes lifelong health problems, why is it still okay to smoke with children in the car? Bottom line, it's not okay. Let's get serious about protecting kids. Join the fight at stopswithme.com.
All children deserve a life of hope and love, but sometimes they experience a life of pain, neglect, and abuse.
When that happens, each child deserves all the quality assistance and representation that can be offered in our legal system. For more information, call 23-CHILD.
Oklahoma Lawyers for Children, helping to bring hope and love back to the lives of abused children.
You will always be mom and dad to me.
You have children coming from a different lifestyle, different mindset. You have to open your arms and really do what you have to do to have that child become a part of your family. And if it's more patience, that's what you do. Kids gotta know they can trust you. And that's what we've tried to do with these kids.
You will always be mom and dad to me.
The Journal-Record is pleased to be a sponsor of The Verdict. The Journal-Record, since 1903, the best source of Oklahoma business news and legal information.
Welcome back to The Verdict. Our guest was Cambrie White. She spoke with authority about the cannabis industry throughout the state of Oklahoma and all of the metrics that are involved.
Well, she was obviously a very capable law student and has spent the first and last 5 years practicing law in this area solely. So she has a lot of experience she's garnered in a short period of time, and she expresses her thoughts very clearly.
Yeah, and you can look to the future and say, will recreational marijuana someday be available in Oklahoma? Will Texas legalize either type of service? And it's an industry that's going to continue to change. I got a feeling her phone's going to be ringing for a long time.
Yes.
A couple of websites you can get more information about Cambrie at overmanlegal.com. We have a website, theverdict.tv, and we'll see you next week on another edition of The Verdict.